Okay, we're going to have a go at cracking this lower control arm ball joint here. We've already taken the spring out, and before we do that, I'm just going to put the control bolts back in and support this so that when that joint does crack, the whole thing doesn't go crashing to the floor. There are two main types of ball joint breaker. The cheap and cheerful ones, which cost about £5, £6, £7, are like a fork, a tapered fork that you put in there and you just bash it and bash it and bash it until the joint cracks, which are absolutely fine. There is a risk of damaging the ball joint if you ever plan to use this ball joint again. You can end up splitting the rubber. A ball joint splitter looks like this. You can pick these up on eBay for somewhere around £10 to £12. I'll leave a link where I got this one, and this one is a similar principle. You have basically the fork here, which you tap into the ball joint like so. So you'd knock that into the ball joint, and then rather than bashing around with a hammer, you simply get a socket on the end of that bolt, and hopefully that will crack the ball joint. So we're going to have a go at doing that. And just to make our life slightly easier, we're going to cover the prongs of this with grease to help it slide in there and give it less chance of damaging anything. We're also going to blast the fitting with some plus gas in this particular case. I should have done that yesterday, really. In theory, all you need to do is tighten that like that, and that should, with a loud snap, eventually just pop out. It is the most enormous amount of force when you're turning this, so make sure you've got plenty of lubricant on these threads and on these threads here. We're going to be using a breaker bar now to see if we can break that ball joint. With a very loud pop and crash, our ball joint breaker has jumped off. We can see that that joint is now broken. We've left the nut on, so obviously this can't go flying down. We should now be able to take that lower control arm off. We got that lower control arm off, and I have to say it's probably one of the worst looking that I've ever seen. Example of all the sorts of things you don't see when you rush out and buy a cheap SL, especially if you've bought one in Europe that's been sitting in the rain and snow, etc. This is probably beyond saving. You could try and weld this up, and I guess if this was a really expensive part and a really rare part, you might do that, but to be perfectly honest, I would imagine this is verging on dangerous in that kind of state. Worth just looking at what this should look like. First of all, this is where the sway bar bushings sit, and you can see that that's all rusted away there. There should be a clear defined lip there. Secondly, there is a gap under here. At least there should be a gap under there. Lets moisture and water run out. You can see on this one here, that gap has completely disappeared. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that the design of this ball joint actually looks to be slightly different than that one. I don't know if they changed it on later models or what they did. So you can buy these refurbished. As I say, this one I think was quoted about £66 from a friend of mine. He bought it in error. This one came with the old bushing still in it. In many cars, this bush can be pressed out either one way or the other way, but on these old 107 SLs, you can't do that because there's actually two bushings in there, one that goes in that way and one that goes in that way, and the only way they come out is that way and that way. And you can get these out in a variety of ways. The one way of getting them out is to get a cold chisel and just bash and bash and bash and bash and bash until you eventually get that out, and then you get them in the same way. Just bash it with a rubber mallet back in. It's one way. Obviously when you do put it back in, make sure you put plenty of grease on there to help it. I'm going to try and show you another way of getting those bushings out without bashing. When you come to take out your lower control arm bushings, the new bushings will look like this. but it's useful to know what that's actually made up of, so when you come to take the old bushing out, you know what you're dealing with. So often when you get a set of mole grips around there, you'll end up twisting out the inner metal section. That is surrounded by a rubber section, which you should just be able to get out with a screwdriver, and that rubber section is surrounded by a much thinner metal section, which often you'll be able to cut out with a hacksaw. You might even be able to pull it out with mole grips, and around that outer section is another rubber section. Okay. First thing to do is get the control arm in a vise, or this is just an old Black & Decker Workmate, and we're just going to try twisting that out with a set of mole grips. What's likely to happen when you get the mole grips around here, if you're lucky, is you're likely to twist out the first piece here. Okay, so let's just see how that goes. See, it's moving. Okay. So this is what usually happens when you try and twist these things out. You twist out the first metal bit here. Okay. Next up, you're going to have a rubber bushing here, which you can normally just pull out as well. Okay, and that is going to leave you with a metal shell and a rubber bit on the outside. If you're very lucky, you can basically get mole grips on these bits of tin, twist the thing out, and the inner metal shell will come out. As I say, we never have been very lucky, so what I'm going to show you, what I normally do, is a blowtorch, set fire to that bit of rubber, the rubber softens, and then you can normally just pull that out. So let's have a go at that. Whatever you do, don't do that in an enclosed space, because as you can see, it gives off a lot of smoke. That rubber burning is absolutely fine. It's going to soften all the rubber. You could either blow that out. I'm just going to let it burn out naturally. The disadvantage of doing this is obviously you're going to end up burning the paint on your lower controller. Should come out nice and easy now. There you go. Okay, so once you've heated that up, basically the inner metal shell will come out, and then you just need to get the last bit of rubber out. Bearing in mind this is going to be hot, you do not want molten rubber on your hands or anything else like that. And there you go. That is how you get the, well, one way of getting the bushings out. You can see that the control arm is just a pipe here, so once you've got the top bushing out, you could just bash the bottom bushing out simply by getting a broomstick or something, preferably a bit of metal pipe down there, and bashing the bottom out with a hammer. I don't like doing that because you risk denting or damaging or distorting this. You can also, once you've got one of the bushings out, use a standard bearing press or ball joint presser to get the bottom one out. Obviously you're going to need a disc cap that fits in there, or you might be lucky and just be able to get both bushings out with the mole grips. So we're just going to have a go and see if we can get that bushing out just using mole grips. Sometimes if you're very, very lucky, you might find you get a bushing that actually comes out in one go. As I say, that's never happened to me before, but it is a first time for everything. And that is almost it, because that rubber bushing, ooh, that's hot, that rubber bushing will just come straight out, and there you have it. Never done that before. So secret is get yourself a really good set of mole grips. I think these just came from Toolstation, but they're the expensive set. So if you've managed to twist out the inner bushing and the rubber and you're left just with that inner bit of tin, and you don't happen to have a map torch, gas torch, or you've got a refurbished bushing that's just been painted and you don't want to burn all the paint off, this is another method of getting that out, and it basically involves putting a hacksaw blade through the inside and just cutting through it. So I'm just going to show you that very quickly. This inner piece of metal is relatively thin, so it shouldn't take long to cut through it, and on the other side of it is a piece of rubber, so there shouldn't be much danger of unscrewing the control arm when you do this. Okay, that looks like it's through now. Once you've cut through that, you should find that this comes out like so. There you go, and then you should just be able to take out the inner bushing, and that is job done without any heat, just a little bit of physical exertion. Bushings back in, make sure you've cleaned the inside of that, either with emery paper, a little brass wheel so there's no rust in there. And before you put the new bushings in, make sure you put grease on them. You can either use standard grease or liquid moly, some people call that ceramic grease, anti-seize grease. You can buy the bushings individually, like this. The part number, if you do that, is 01685. Why you'd want to do that, I don't know, because it's usually cheaper buying a kit. Part number for the kit is 01692. That comes with 4 bushes and 2 of the cam bolts which you'll need, and we got that from Mr. Auto for £22, usually much cheaper buying a kit than buying the individual bushes. We got our ball joint breaker from eBay, cost us £11.98 including postage, and arrived in just a couple of days.